Hey, welcome to the Coalcast. Today we have our fourth and final special episode of our series featuring all the demonstrators from our Andy Davis Hammer in 2023. Today we have the incredible Will Stelter, and he is featuring his full-size forged integral chopper. This thing is a monster, and he quickly iterates right through the process, telling you exactly how he does and why he does what he does. So I think it's definitely worth a listen. So check out Will Stelter, really diving into his process on this one. It's a fantastic treat. Next Wednesday, we're going to get back on our regular schedule, and we're going to be talking through the entire Andy Davis Hammerin', updates for what we're going to be launching early 2024. So that'll definitely be worth a listen. So thank you so much for checking this episode out with our special guest, Will Stelter, and really excited to get this in front of you guys. Thank you so much.
We're over time, but that's all right. If y'all want to hang out, you can. We're going to talk about how to forge these. These are what I call indestructible choppers. My name is Will Stelter, by the way, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a bladesmith from Montana. Yeehaw. And I came up with this design a couple of years ago now. They're an awful lot of fun to forge. Just
bouncing off the greatness of this.
That's great. Yeah, right there. Perfect. They're an awful lot of fun to forge. You can do them in all sorts of different styles. The last couple that I've done in this kind of funky, worn, cliffy type blade. And doing them in this way with kind of the I-beamed handle and the fuller running into the blade is something that I started doing specifically because I had the digital press controller on my 25-ton Coal Iron Works press. It would be possible, but nightmarish to try and do it otherwise. The settings on that really make it a feasible process. And so, good thing I kind of cooking showed it a little bit and made a couple of progressions of how I get from starting stock like this to the kind of pre-form for everything to then, being able to get everything wrapped up. I'm going to go ahead and pass this around if you guys want to have a look at it. That started off as a 3.3 pound chunk of 2-inch by 1-inch L6, which is a super tough tool steel. You can kind of make these out of anything. They're kind of a very open, you can do it however you like. The first one that I made was a kukri, and I forged it out of the end of the horn of an anvil from one of the Alex Steel Co. rejected anvils. And so there's not like a set way to do it. I've also forged them out of inch and a half round bar or inch and a quarter hex bar. You can kind of forge them out of all sorts of stuff. I find it to be most convenient to start forging it from something like this because it makes getting to the preform stage the easiest, basically. We'll be all right. I'll forge on these. It'll be good. So to start off with, depending on how you get started, let's say, sorry, Andrew. Let's say you're starting off with this guy. I've got a matching billet in the fire right now. I like to portion off. On these guys, I did exactly 50-50 blade material to handle material. This is a 4-pound chunk. This is a 3 1/3 pound chunk. And so I'm going to go a little bit smaller on my handle material. I'd say you probably want about 1.5 pounds of handle material. Do you guys know how to calculate out steel weights? You calculate the volume, how many cubic inches, and then multiply that times 0.283. Basically, a quarter of a cubic inch is, or 4 cubic inches is 1 pound. So I'm going to take my billet out of the fire, and I'm going to use one of these tools right here. This is a power hammer. You can use them in the press tool that allows you to get a very strong isolation. It goes very quickly. You lay it down on top of a billet like that, and as you hammer down, if you were to just use a round bar, it would kind of create a very sloppy transition, but you want to start isolating out that handle material so you have a nice kind of fast transition. Honestly, for this, You could probably do it with a round bar, it would be all right. But I like to keep things as crispy as possible to see where everything's at along the way, and then we'll come in later with a different tool and forge in our choil in there so it's nice and comfortable. So I'm going to pull my billet out of the fire and isolate out that material and then start drawing out my handle material this way, just a little bit. Alrighty. I unfortunately did not bring great tongs to be able to hold these pieces with. Holding this rectangular bar is a nightmare because square tongs don't really want to do it. And I waited until the very last second to make sure, oh. These will do a lot better. Ooh, we'll see how it goes. So, not quite halfway, right there. Nice. And from there, ooh, this is going to be rough. Back, start to forge that down a little bit more. I use a good few top tools, both with a hand hammer and with a power hammer or press to get things where I want it. You guys saw, started to forge down a little bit of a hump right there. That's a very easy thing to get out using all sorts of different top tools. This kind of flatter-ish type thing has a lot of different uses. And again, these work under a press as well. As long as you're clearing your material over here. Nice. Alrighty. So, if I was going to keep on, sweet. If I was going to keep on forging this all the way down, basically what I do from here is get that handle to the point where it is drawn out a good ways. I get the blade forged down a good bit as well. I want to be around 3/4 of an inch thick. I like my blade to be about 2 inches wide at this point. You can go thinner if you're really confident in your ability to pull out the heel of a blade. Like Nico, probably start off with very small stock, and because he's great at forging integrals and he knows he can forge that thing out exactly how he likes it. But if you don't have as much experience doing that, you can start out with wider stock and move on from there. After, oh gosh, I really can't cook and show that because I threw my fuller in here. Well, I don't know how much time do you think I should take up? Alrighty. Well, I'm going to let this one cool down and start heating up the next one. These guys, what I did from that point, like I said, was forge it down a little bit. My blade is also a little bit thinner. It is, the handle is a 1/2 inch thick, and the blade is at about 300,000ths of an inch thick by 1.5 inches wide. This is a smaller size than what I've done in the past. I normally start off with a 4 or 5 pound billet, and these were, 3.3 pounds. So where did that one go? There it is. So some of the ones that I've done in the past were, the biggest one that I've done was 27 inches total, which is about like that, and it was hefty. I kind of like this lighter, faster one. It's a lot similar size to the first one that I ever did. So, yeah. Alrighty, so after we get our whole billet forged down good ways, the handle's a little bit thicker, started to forge in that transition, and so now I'm going to flip this guy around, and I'm going to start forging in my blade shape. Well, yeah, I'll show you all how I like to use hammers. I've got a 25-pound little giant with kind of pillowy drawing dies on it, and learning how to use that thing influenced the way that I hand forge as well quite a bit, and so we'll give that a shot. got my, there they are. So I'll pass this one around right now. This is the next progression that we're going to. I don't know if you want to zigzag it back and forth. But after I got this handle isolated, the blade isolated from the handle material, did it just die? No, we're good. I use these 5/8 fullers in my 25-ton C-frame, and straight down the middle. I don't want to go too far with it, but this is the start of that I-beaming. You got to keep in mind as you're doing this, you don't want your handle to be at the full width because you're about to squish it almost in half, which stretches it out about 5/8 of an inch wide. And so if you start off with your handle being at the final dimension that you want it to be, and then you throw a 5/8 fuller down the middle of it, your handle is going to be 5/8 inch wider than you want it to be. I don't want to go too far with my fuller at this point. These are a funky object to try and hang on to the whole time that you're forging them, simply because, well, once you forge out this blade and it's 3 inches wide, unless you've got a big giant pair of tongs, even then, they're impossible to hang on to. So I like to get that fuller going, partially because I hate hanging on to rectangular stock. You guys probably know that it's a nightmare to hang on to, and so starting that fuller not only gives me a little bit better idea of what my final handle dimension is going to be, but it gives me a really great place to throw a pair of 1/2 inch V-bit tongs. And so, yeah, that's the way that I hold it while I'm forging out my blade. So I get my preform done, I get my fuller started into the handle, then I start forging out my blade. I get it drawn out fairly wide before I do the rest of the work on the handle here. Missed a step there. From here, before I start forging out my blade, you can kind of do it whenever, but it's nice to do it when you have square stock or a flat rectangular bar. We're going to forge in our choil area. You guys see that on here, there's a bit of kind of triangular material right there where it's a little bit thicker. I leave that there as I forge it in so that I can have that very pronounced finger swell at the top right there. That material that sits right there is a lot more comfortable on your finger as you choke up on these things than, thinner stock. If you got it, an 1/8 inch thick or whatever it would be right there, 1/4 inch thick, I find it a lot more pleasant. So the next step, well, get this sucker heated up. The next step as we get that guy heated up is taking a top tool. The one that I have at home is a much finer radius, but Andrew and I made this yesterday because it fits into that finger choil size a lot better. And so we'll come over to the vise and I'll just by myself get in here and start moving that material around, starting to upset and swell it out a little bit. It doesn't have to be a ton. I just want to get it started so that it's at the shape that I want, so that as I start to forge my blade out, I'm not messing with that area very much, or I at least know where to avoid it. So it just helps keep the process, you just know what's going on in that area. You can avoid it. Yeah. Cool. Any questions so far? Yeah.
Keep the handle to blade proportion the same, or do you tend to get just like, do you like that handle proportion and extend the blade out?
Yeah, so for ones, the ones that I've done that have a bigger blade than this, I don't make the handle a ton larger. I'd maybe make it 1 inch or 2 larger, and maybe a little bit wider, like a little bit bigger. It kind of depends. I have smaller hands. I've got 10 little baby hands actually, and so this handle is super comfortable for me. Someone that has bigger hands, I'm sure this is probably not their favorite handle. I would say you don't want to go too much wider. You don't always want it to be 50-50. I mean, you could if you wanted to forge like some dope giant thing. Yeah, there's a lot of room for creativity here. The things that I really wanted to talk about were how to cut that fuller in, how to I-beam the handle, how to use top tools, how to draw out your blade nice and wide, all of that stuff. Because yeah, there's so much that you can do here that I think they're just honestly a great time. They're one of my favorite things to do. I've done, when Logan's come to visit Montana, we forged them out, forged them with a couple other friends as well. And they're a fun project when you're with other people because it's a lot of forging. You're not hanging out in the grinding room all day because that sucks when you got someone who comes over. You don't want to be stuck at the mill or in the grinding room or whatever. They're a nice like social thing to be able to do. They're fun to go back and forth, see how other people work, all that stuff. So that's part of the reason why I really enjoy them. I've only forged 2 of them, I think, or 3 of them just by myself. They're always with friends around. And so, yeah. Any other questions? Come on. It doesn't have to be about this. We can ask other questions too. Neat. Cool. What? No, that was a joke. Yeah. All right. So, I very, 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 very highly recommend getting a good vise to forge in. Whether you decide to be old school and use a post vise, or if you want to get a nice big bench vise, it's an absolute necessity. So I get it locked up pretty close to where that handle transition is, and then just start to move that material down, start to swell out your finger area. Yeah. That's a lot nicer looking than it was before. And I probably won't take another heat on that as is right now. It's a nice radius. Next heat, what I'll do is I'll take to under the hammer, and I think I'm going to forge my tip in under the hammer. Please grab it. Nice. So I'll forge that tip in underneath these pillowy dies. I think they've got enough radius to them to be okay. I'll probably have to clean it up a little bit by hand. But yeah. Any questions about any of that? You got a silent crowd here. Man. Really? Nothing? Are you guys just being shy? What? I don't believe you, but thank you. Yeah, so you can totally use a ball peen. The reason why I like to use a wider fuller is just because a ball peen would be effective at it, but you wouldn't get as consistent of a radius. This thing's not done forging. I will probably forge on this more when I get home, just by the way. For those of you who noticed that it wasn't straight and all that junk, just a little disclaimer there. But I like that it allows me to get a more even radius. Yeah, ball peens, it ends up with like that rockier, peened texture. And this, I find you can control it just a little bit easier with it. You could definitely get it wider with a ball peen and then clean it up with this. I don't super recommend whacking hammers on hammers. Top tools differ from hammers in a couple different ways. Do you guys use top tools in your work pretty often? Nico doesn't. He's a bladesmith. Yeah, hammer on hammer. Top tools are different in that it's not a hourglass shaped die, it's just tapered, and so this will come off if you whack on the top of it. And there's a couple reasons behind that. These handles break a lot more often, I think is a big portion of why. It's really easy to fit that up. It doesn't have, so it's shaving time there. These tools are also not hardened, at least the striking face is, because you don't want to strike hard steel on hard steel. I know a guy, I think he's in Washington, who's got the corner of a hammer in his liver because he was striking a hard hard tool on a hard tool. And that's why you don't want to do hammer on hammer. If you get like a hard 1045 hammer and an S7 hammer, one of those hammers is going to win. There's varying different schools of thought on whether or not you should have a hard hammer or a soft hammer. Andrew and the Brazil guys are in soft-ish hammer gang. Relatively soft. Yeah. Well, softer than hardened S7. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of farriers harden, make their hammers out of S7, that tool steel, and then don't temper it, and it is wicked hard. So, yeah. Alrighty. We're going to fire up the hammer and start drawing out, oh no, we're going to do our tip first, and then we'll start drawing out our bevels. Yeah. Good heat planning. The tip of this thing was a little bit crusty. A technique that I learned from my buddy Kurt Holland is if you tip fish mouths on you, if you have a sharp edge on your anvil, you don't want to straight hot cut it on there, but you can get really close, and then you can break it off. You don't want to whack the edge of your anvil with your hammer face, but you can hot cut off the tip on the anvil, which is, I think, very handy. Alrighty. Next heat, we're going to start forging out our bevels. I like to get my blade almost completely done before cutting in that fuller. And something I didn't mention about, where's that other one that's floating around? Something I didn't mention. As I cut in this fuller, kind of pre-form for the handle, I don't want to go thinner than how thick the blade is. And a big reason for that is if I forge this down to, 200 thou and the blade is at 350 thou, and then I run my fuller all the way in, what do you think is going to happen? Luke, what do you think is going to happen? Oh, I said, if my fuller is at 200 thousandths of an inch and my blade is at 300 thou, and I run that into the blade, what's going to happen? Yeah, you're going to get a big old hump right here where it transitions. And so if you keep it even, as you forge it, that line is going to stay a lot more even, and I think it's just a lot easier to manage. It's easier to manage getting that hump even when, this is a lot thicker of material. When it gets thinner, when you've got big, thick cross-section here and thin webbing down the middle, you can buckle that webbing. And so I don't do my final pass on getting that down to, this is 100 thou at the bottom of it. I don't do that until like the very, very, very end. And so that's not quite my last thing. I still straighten a little bit after that and whatnot, but that is almost the last step. All right. Start forging down our bevels on this guy. So if you're forging under a hammer, less so under a press, being able to control a piece from two sides as you're working on something that's trying, when you're working with dies like this, it really is going to want to spit the blade out. And so holding on to it at the blade and on the handle allows you to have way, way, way better control over the workpiece. And so, having a nice set of flat bits with some variability, like these guys right here, you'd be able to hang on to a chef's knife or something really thick. This is a perfect set of tongs for it. And I'm going to start off mostly on my edge and kind of draw a taper like Andrew was talking about earlier. Another thing is that as I start to forge this out, even though I have a nice transition right there, if I just sit and try to forge this straight out, inevitably that material is going to push this way, and so I won't have a nice straight 90 transition. And so you want to angle that piece under a set of dies like this. And start to pull that material down to be able to create that nice transition. Having that top tool will kind of allow you to play around and mess up on that a little bit more and still have nice material for your finger well. But yeah, all right, I'm done with this guy. We power hammered it until we're right here. We've got our blade forged out, relatively thin bevels, not super duper thin. My edge is at about 100 thou for most of it. It's a little thicker at the tip and at about 300 thou at the spine. I maintain that spine. I make sure that it doesn't get really too much thinner than that. I like to leave a little bit of extra meat so that I can straighten it underneath my press. Not with those. I use the full width combo dies. From here, what we're going to start doing is, there's a couple different ways to do it. I think from here what we're going to start doing is forging in our fuller to the final depth. On this one, I'm going to turn off the hammer. On this one, I forged in, I forged from the blade in, cutting my fuller like this, and then to forge my fuller into the blade, I flipped it around and pulled it like that. That's how I've not done it in the past. In the past, I've held it by the blade and fed it in like that. And what that allows you to do is see where your fuller is going to go. When you hold it like this and feed it like that, you can't see where you're steering, which is why this has about 85 different fuller marks in it rather than one smooth fuller. This is what the first one that I did looked like fuller-wise, and then I wisened up to it. But I was feeding it the proper way that time. I just hadn't cut a fuller with it before. The nice thing about cutting a fuller into half-inch material also, and as we'll start to I-beam this out, is you can set the press to not go very thin, or not come up very high, and so it'll kind of guide itself along. Once you get this cut in, cutting this is not terribly challenging. You've got a flat, straight bar. You go from half inch, I go down 100 thou increments. So I started off at a half inch. I kind of got it lined up, went down to, oftentimes I won't go a full 100 thou. I'll like very lightly tippy tap on down. I keep it in spring return mode while I'm doing this. For the final passes, I go into auto mode, but as I'm cutting it in, I want to have the control of making sure that it's me who's pressing down on every time. I've tried doing it in auto mode before, but if it bounces out a little bit, it's really easy to do that down something like this. So we'll get this guy heated up and we'll start cutting in our fuller to the proper depth. Any questions about cutting in fullers? You don't have to have a press to do this. You could make like a spring swage to do it and do it by hand with an anvil or on an anvil with a hammer. You can do it with a guillotine tool very easily. That's probably the most precise way to do it, but it's definitely not as fun as using the press. So.
When you do the rounded edges on top of the line, is that just I-beam at the very end?
Yeah, so he asked when I do the rounded edges, I call it I-beaming if that's at the very end. So yeah, what I'll do is we will get this this fuller cut in, and then from there we're going to throw it into the vise. We'll get the preform of the handle done, and so I think that if you're going to do a handle like this, it looks 1,000 times better if you give it some dimension, if you give it a little bit of line to it. It's not super hard to do. I don't know why. It really bugs me when I see these like fully forged handles that are just dead straight. That does not do it for me. I like to see that it's like an intentionally forged item and not just I I-beamed the end of a chunk of steel. I want it to still look like a handle. And so I go cut my fuller in. Don't want to go too thin with it before you start doing the I-beaming. If you do that final pass at that last, like I said, I want to get that to 100th thou, and then you try and I-beam it, you will buckle the webbing in the middle there. And so I like to keep it at about 200th thou. I'm not the most efficient forger. If I take my time, I can make something that looks nice, but I oftentimes flip-flop back and forth and spin it around and heat up one side and then the other side and whatnot, and very much go back and forth. I don't have my hit count for how long this takes, partially because everyone that I've done has been mostly different sizes and starting with different stock, and so it's kind of a very creative process. Yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I like to do that. Not quite at the very end. I go cut in my fuller, get it where I want it, give it dimension, and then from there I will squeeze it out a little bit wider, and then I'll start I-beaming. And but yeah, we'll get there in a minute. How are we doing on time? It's 8 o'clock. Not 8 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock. I'm on military time. Sorry, guys. Alrighty. So give this a go. Y'all can't really see this, can you? I'll grab one more pin. Alright. So I get it into the slot that I've already cut. Oh, that's funky. Nice. Now I can feed it in a little bit more. That fuller was at 300 thou at the bottom of the webbing. This is just 250, so I'm just crushing it down a little bit, and then from there I'll I-beam it. Yeah, and then after that I'll cut it all the way in. I will. Shoot. Are you guys good to hang out for a little while? Is that all right? All right, we'll keep on going. Any other questions about cutting in fullers or anything like that?
I got a question about design. So from
Sure.
your original design
Yeah.
to then forging, what has been kind of the thing that you've been having to chase as like the main problem about getting it to where you want it to be?
I'd say I think the most challenging thing, shape-wise, the shape's not super challenging. I've had the most issue getting clean fullers and getting my edge thin enough. Performance-wise, I really like to forge these edges super thin because I think I like to have like a 1/2 inch wide bevel at the edge, and that's it. And so for that edge needs to be pretty dang thin. I'll go a decent little bit thinner than this. The last thing that I would do here is draw that out. I'd like it to be like that 16th inch area right there. And so, yeah.
So you explained how you overcome the fullering issue to the blade.
Yeah.
How do you overcome how thin you were going to get the blade?
I control that mostly just using my 25-pound little giant. I wanted this one to like have the right shape, and so I care less about my edge profile on a final forged piece than I do my spine profile. I want my spine to look nice because I don't want to grind that spine. I will grind my false edge, I will grind my edge. Sometimes I'll grind the butt on these. This one's kind of ugly, so I'd probably grind it. But I pretty much just want that edge and that spine there, because I'll do probably a false edge on this as well. And so I'll get that thin, and if it's a little wider, I don't care. I'll grind it back to the profile that I like. I'd rather have the dimension this direction proper than the shape of the edge, because it'll be lumpy and a little wavy and whatnot. Unless you have the exact perfect material allotment for how thin and wide and long you want it to be. So, yeah. Alrighty. These might work better. Alrighty. I'll save cutting my fuller in the blade until after I get my handle done, and I'll just do it all in one go. In the past, I've got it like laid out and then gone back and done my handle and then come back and done the fuller in the blade, but I think it'll be probably a good bit more time efficient to do the handle first. So my next step here is going to be swelling out the butt of the handle, and so I will bring that, and I do that before doing any I-beaming because I still have those nice flat planes on the side of it, and so drawing that the butt out nice and wide is going to be a lot easier than trying to do it after I do the I-beaming. The I-beaming is very delicate because it's so thin, and so straightening it or doing almost any manipulation to it is going to make it look worse. You kind of want it to be the very last thing because it's a fragile, sharp edge almost. It doesn't feel sharp, but we want to save the best for last. And it kind of sucks because you don't really know what it's going to look like exactly dimension-wise because you can forge that I-beaming down more or less, and it's kind of hard to judge unless you've done it a couple times exactly what that dimension is going to end up being. Let's steal Andrew's crosspeen. Who made this? Is that his old touch mark? Huh. Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's Brooklyn Ford style blades. So
Yeah.
You're not going to grind fullers.
No. So everything on, the only thing that I will grind on this is the shape of my edge, sometimes the butt, shape of that, and then like a very small bevel. I want it to be completely forged.
You don't have to worry about getting your fullers to match some small radius window.
Exactly, yeah. And those fullers are absolutely delightful for that reason, because they look just super good. I'm a huge fan. Alrighty. So I like using a bench vise for this sort of thing, a very big one. The bigger the better, but I want to focus mostly on the side that your fingers are going to be on towards the edge of the knife. I'm not going to let that get too far before opening up that I-beaming again. You can get a cold shut if you let that get too far. So we'll quickly open that. We'll probably do that one or two more times. And then from there, I'll start to crush in the top of my handle and in the middle here just a little bit. And that just means that, we'll have that nice kind of palm swell in the middle. It would be a palm swell if maybe for like Andre the Giant if he had bigger hands. But I just think it looks a lot nicer to have a little bit of dimension in there. I personally, if I have curves on my blade, I want to have curves all over the blade, and I like those curves to be complementary. And so I want the curve on the back of the handle to match the curve in the upsweep of the blade. And similarly here, I like that curve to look similar to this curve, to look similar to that curve. I think that flows a lot better. And it doesn't really matter how you do it. You can have that be just a straight drop point and it'll still look totally fine. But yeah, I like to have nice shapely curves on these things. I think it makes the eye just slide down it a lot easier. Y'all have any questions about upsetting the butt or any of that good stuff? You can also, as you're doing this, depending on what you want to do, upset this material here and make a butt cap. So not have that fuller run all the way out. My buddy Zane Dvorak, when he came over and we forged these, that's what he did, is he just upset the end of that thing like crazy until it filled out and matched the thickness of the sidewall. So he forged it out to 1/2 inch thick and it looked great. Yeah. From here, the next heat, I'll start to move that material down, start to shape the butt how I want it. It's also mushroomed out a good bit. And so it'll get a good bit wider as I take a cross peen to it and start to stretch it out. But I personally don't love to have a flare at the back there. I want it to kind of just flow around. This one is not a great example of that. There is a small flare. It's very slight. But some guys, like Jason Knight does quite a few knives, and he kind of invented this general handle style, but it flows up and has kind of a kick back there. To me, it looks like bootcut jeans, where it like flares out on both sides. And so I think it can look good, but I like to have it just flow and then kick off and then come back around at a fairly steep angle. And part of that is that on smaller knives, having that be smoothed over is more comfortable and kind of like the palm of your hand, depending on how you're holding that knife. On this, it's less of an issue. It gives you a little bit more room for that hand if you do have it swell out and have a sharper point there. But it's all personal preference for design and stuff like that. Okay. I don't know how this anvil is going to like this. I think it's going to not like it at all. Oh. I've got a radius on my big anvil. That's probably a 1-inch radius or so, and it makes the corner of that anvil huge, and that makes hooking that bird's beak, that's what we call that right there. It makes hooking that over the edge and forging back into it really, really easy because it's a 400-pound anvil with a big wide radius. Honestly, this will probably work really good for that. We'll give that a shot. Maybe. This might want to move around too much.
Here. Get on that side, Al.
There we go. That'll be good. Yeah. All righty. Let's give this a shot. So I'll hook it right there and start forging back into it. It allows me to forge that down and pivot that material rather than having to move it around as much as you would, I think, on the horn. Ooh. This is what I call an elf shoe, and I do not like how they look. That's a very aggressive elf shoe. You forge that back down. It'll be really easy for something like that to cold shut on you. Yeah, that's not so good. I did not do a great job of upsetting the material there on the end. You see, you want a much gentler slope at home. Yeah, the vise that I use, the reason why I like to forge in bench vices is because they close parallel as opposed to having a pivot. This is about as good of a post vise as you can get, but I find that in my opinion, they're better for really heavy striking. I don't do a whole lot of super heavy striking, and so I like having those two surfaces that close perfectly parallel, and it allows me, I think, to get a better. They generally also have a finer pitch thread, and so they can clamp a little bit tighter, and so it's easier for me to upset that material. There are other ways to do it. You could clamp it in a press and whack on it like that with a straight peen or something like that, and that would be extremely effective. There's many different ways to skin that cat. You can honestly also just hang on to it and just forge back into yourself and start to upset that material. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. I'm going to move on from trying to sort that out. It's doable. You probably need to grind on it a little bit to make sure it doesn't cold shut at all. But I'm just going to shape the top of that material, and then so I'll get it shaped to my rough swoop-de-doops that I want for my handle. Then from there, we'll cut in our fuller, then we'll I-beam, then we'll finish off our fuller. Any questions? You're killing me. The biggest tree I've chopped down? The biggest tree within a 5-mile radius of my house is like this big. What's that? No, I'm saying there's no trees near my house. Oh. Yeah. No, shoot, what have I cut with this? I cut a 2x4.5 with three chops.
3 chops?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Will, would you be doing a differential heat treatment on that just because of how thin the blade is? Or?
I've done full quenches on all of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I can fit the whole thing into my heat treat oven. It's a 27-inch kiln, and
because it's a chopper, it's a very sharp edge, or I guess not sharp edge.
more convex.
Obtuse.
Yeah. And so part of the reason why there's no real reason to quench the whole thing, apart from the fact that it's more convenient for me, honestly. I know that I'm getting a good heat treat. Haven't dealt with any warping or cracking issues. If you did have warping issues, there's no way to get them out because it is massive. But besides heating it back up and reheat treating it. And so, but I quench them as forged. I quench pretty much all of my blades as forged. And the reason for that is I don't have to deal with warping issues hardly at all. In my experience, a lot of the warping issues come from I think the decarb that happens, and so if you grind through decarb, if you grind on one side and leave the other side forged, it's going to warp pretty bad. If you leave it all forged, it doesn't really warp at all. And so chef's knives, fighters, everything. It's all, I quench them all pretty much. Maybe I'll do a little bit of profiling. That doesn't work for everything. If you're doing like an actual hamon, like a good differential heat treatment, or like certain things where you need to do work that you can't do when it's hardened. Like I did a little pierced dagger that had a couple holes in it for Blade Show this year, and I needed to be able to file on it. I can't do that when it's hardened, and so I got it really, really close and then gave it, but I made sure that there was no decarb on the blade at all before quenching it. And so, but I got the things that needed to be close, and left the other stuff as thick as possible so that I could grind through my decarb layers. But then you also don't have to deal with decarb twice, and yeah, I think it makes more sense. It's definitely how I prefer to do it. Alrighty, we can get our blade pre-formed. So I like to squish in. Sick. Good. I like to squish in at the top of the handle. I think the hardest part about making these is honestly holding on to them the whole time. They're squirrely. So I want a bit of a taper going from the top of the handle kind of to like that midway point, and then the same thing in the other direction, except I just do more of a like kind of a general scoop. We're going to give these big tongs a try again. Maybe these guys will work. Go ahead.
You said you removed your decarb.
Yeah.
Is that something you're seeing in the blade, or how do you know that?
Yeah, so decarb, do you guys know what decarb is? Most of you? So it's as steel is over the critical temperature, I think that's when it starts decarbing. As far as I know, it's when it starts decarbing. Carbon bleeds out of the blade. So it doesn't happen at room temperature, it starts happening when it's hot. And so the very outside layer of the steel loses its carbon, it becomes unhardenable, the properties change a little bit, and so the place where we see it the most in at least knife making is in like a brute de forge Damascus blade. You can have your forge scale like on your knife. Ooh, that wanted to open up. You have like your little sanmai, and this is all brute de forge down here. You'd have your pattern along the edge, you'd have your brute de forge on the top of it, and then there's a bright white line that runs in between the forge scale and the Damascus pattern that is like high contrast etched. And that is where the carbon has bled out, and so the whatever etchant that you're using, depending on, coffee can kind of hide it, but doesn't do a great job at it all the time. That yeah, that's where we see it, where you can like physically see it. But yeah, it's unhardenable material because steel, what makes steel hardenable is iron and carbon combined. I know what, yeah, so basically it doesn't turn into iron necessarily. Maybe it does. Does it turn?
No, it takes a long time to do that.
What's that? I mean, but that outside layer, I guess no, because it wouldn't, yeah, it wouldn't be, because you need to be down to like 0.05% carbon for it to be iron. Yeah. All righty. I oftentimes will forge it from the like spine up to get that that initial taper in there. Oof. Well, I might just do that section of it, cut my fuller, I-beam it, and then we'll be done. time to go home. Any questions? What? Oh. Nothing?
Some of the projects you got coming up.
Projects that I have coming up? Mostly my Mastersmith set. That's going to be the biggest thing for the next like 6 months or so. I should have got started on it like 6 months ago, but I didn't. Something like that, yeah. Oh man, they are not super stoked on not doing the like approved. I asked if I could do a pizza cutter, and all of the Mastersmiths that I asked were like, don't you dare. That's an absolutely terrible idea. And I was like, okay, but if you look at it by like purely definition wise, a pizza cutter is a knife. There's no way that you could define a knife that, I'm thinking about it. I think it's a bad idea. I don't want to, yeah. Maybe I will. I did explicitly ask several people, and they were like, no, don't do that. A wheel. Yeah. Because if you define a pizza, or if you define a knife, it's like, it doesn't even say a handled object. It's just something that's made to cut or shear. I'm gonna make one of those with like Italian Renaissance style stiletto handle, like super fancy, like what Niels does. That's the plan anyway. All right, I'm gonna move this down to 200 thou, and my top set point is gonna be a 1/2 inch, and I'm gonna feed it in from this side. I want to bring that fuller. Ugh. I want to bring that fuller to the apex of the crest of the knife, basically. So like Andy, would you get that? Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. I want to bring that fuller to just purely a visual thing to the crest of wherever that peak is. And I'm going to have that on pretty much all of these that I forge, wherever that blade starts to drop down, or if you don't have a crest in the back of it, wherever the edge is going to start to curve up. That's like visually about where you want it to be, like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way into the blade. It would also be very easy to not run that fuller into the blade and just do it in the handle and have a hard transition like you have on an integral at the top. You do it on the bottom. If I was going to do it on the top, I'd do it on the bottom too. If I was going to do it on the bottom, I'd probably do it on the top too. Yeah. Thank you. All right, so it's more closed up here now. That would potentially be a problem, except for it's not going to be because this press makes it very easy. So we start off right here. Normally I'd start at the end, but I'm not going to finish out the end of this thing right now. You see it just kind of finds its way, and it squishes it way out. So from where it was, I hadn't forged in this stuff before, so it looks like it just went straight back. When you forge it in dimensionally along the whole thing and forge it down, you do keep that dimension. But it follows along that previous path very, very, very easily, which is really nice. I'm gonna see if it'll use these 60 tons to cold forge on this guy. Nice. And now I'm going to keep on hanging on to it from this side. I'm not going to flip it around like I did on that one. I'm going to feed it in so I can watch. And I'm going to follow the curve of that spine to the best of my ability with the fullers. I was thinking of maybe seeing if they would be able to build some slightly shorter fullers, like 1.5 inches or 1 inch. I think it'd be easier to follow curves with a smaller radius. I don't think. I know it'd be easier to follow curves with a smaller radius. And so if it had a more aggressive curve in the spine, having something shorter is going to make it easier. That being said, something this wide, you can still make it look good. We'll see. I'll probably mess it up, but that's all right. Any fuller questions? Nothing?
How thin do you want to end up with the web?
I like that. You can make that web almost as thin as you want.
Okay,
The thinnest.
relationship to the spine of a knife. Say that knife blade is an eighth inch.
I haven't taken these thinner than 100 thou. It's probably gone a little bit thinner because when you do it really hot, and it's that small of an area and it doesn't have a whole lot of material to move, these can overshoot by a little bit because I think it accounts for having some resistance or something. Maybe. What's that? Okay. But yeah, so it's probably like 80 thou is about as thin as I'd taken it. If you're doing a giant chopper, that's going to be a thicker thing it's going to be, you don't want it to go to a 16th inch or, thinner than that. If you're doing a chef's knife, it probably doesn't matter as much. You can kind of go as thin as possible because you're not beating on it, That being said, you probably could go really, really, really thin with this, and I don't think that it would matter because you'd have to bend. Yeah, you could almost take that to like almost nothing, and it would probably be just fine. Yeah. I haven't had any issues with it. It's got enough thermal mass that it's staying very stable. It's being supported by these giant bars on the outside, and there's no hard transitions, and so there's no stress risers there. It works out pretty good. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to start off where I was before and just very slowly feed it in. Do you see how much cleaner that is? It's ridiculous. Yeah. So the other neat thing is that if you taper your blade, that fuller will, I think that this started to not like it because it was like fairly cold because there's not a whole lot of taper there. There might be in the blade itself, but I don't think so. But if you taper that blade pretty aggressively and you keep that on the same setting, it will naturally thin that fuller out, which looks really good. And you see it equalized with the spine of the handle, and so you don't have to go around and mess with that now that things are starting to get thin. It stays at the same dimension. What's that?
Did they die out in the same place?
They would if this was a set of fullers, but these are two random fullers from around the shop that do not quite line up. What we can do though is flip it around and do it from the other side, and that way it theoretically will be the same. Yeah. That being said, you don't have a great stopping point, so see how it goes. Yeah. My fullers that were made as a set, they line up edge to edge, just right. Yeah, and so when you look at it, it's right there, and yeah, so it lines up very good. Yeah. Alrighty, so we're at 200 thou. I will go to 150. Oh, not 0.15. I've made that mistake before. I've also done it the other way, where you want it to be 1.5 inches, and I accidentally type in 0.15, and then you ruin everything. 0.15. So we're going to go down a little bit more, then we'll I-beam out our handle, and then we'll call it a day. looks so good on this side. The other side I messed it up on, but you can't see it from there, so it's all right. So now that we've got it started, we're still at 150 thou at the bottom. I'll I-beam out our handle. Yeah, I'm just gonna stick up here. You guys can see that even a 50 thou difference right there bumped it out. Not quite 50 thou, but kind of close, which is why you want to keep everything nice and even as you're doing that. You definitely don't want to do what I'm doing for this demo because it would look awful. But it'll be okay. Yeah, the nice thing about those fullers is that because they're so shiny, you guys probably know the general principle of whatever you're forging into is going to be the thing that's imprinting on your steel. And so when you have like shiny fullers, it doesn't look machined, but it's shiny forged. I've never said that word out loud before, but yeah, but it's like more than just planish because it is like pressed in with a near mirror finish. And so you get a very interesting looking finished forging. This is a very bad example of it. On other finished ones that I've had, it looks not quite machine cut, but you're like, dang, that's crispy. This is not crispy, this is crusty. Yeah. Andrew, do you have a smaller hammer around here somewhere? Oh, there it is. You're the one that has the smaller hammer. Why are you mad at me? I like to use usually a 2-pound hammer for this with a pretty round face. That it acts like a big old ball peen just about, so it's not creating dimples, but allows you to kind of smear that material around. This sounds kind of weird, but it's been my experience that as I'm forging on this, generally we're forging towards ourselves, and so it's really easy to pull that material this way. I used to make a lot of these little like single bevel marking knives called kiridashis, and I would I-beam the handles on them, and I found that I would always get really nice crisp lines on the side, on my hammer side, and it would be very dull on the far side. And so I started pushing the hammer. I know it sounds weird. It sounds like a weird blacksmith lore thing. It's been my experience that that pushes the material around better, and you can get crisper mushrooming with it. Rather than just hitting straight down, you're pushing away and pulling towards you. And so from here, I'll come up on edge, and I'm pulling back towards myself like that. And then same thing you want to do it on the far side. This anvil is way sharper than what I would normally forge on. But in order, I don't want to hang it straight off there, especially if we've got a heel that comes back, because then I'll get a weird indent right what's in line with that heel. And so I'll come sideways on the anvil like that when I'm doing forging on the spine. And then, well, yeah, you can kind of game it the other way, but well, let's see if we can do a little test. See. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to see that, but there's definitely a difference between just hitting straight down right there and then how wide it goes out when you push against it. I know it sounds weird, but I think it's true. You're all right. We'll be done in a second. I'm not gonna finish this one. I'm gonna leave it here for Logan to finish. Okay.
So did this design start on paper?
This one started off on soapstone on a concrete floor. I don't actually know if I've ever drawn one of these on paper. I've drawn them on my chalkboard wall, I've drawn them on the floor, but I don't think I've ever actually, I draw a ton. I draw all the time. And I don't meticulously design these. I'm very up in the air and
Free flow.
yeah. So I like to break my corners first before starting to do kind of any more aggressive rounding. So we're starting to get that like very buckled shape to it. Not perfect yet by any means. I'll probably take another heat or two on it, and then I'll start to do a little bit of rounding. The rounding kind of naturally happens because, well, I'll throw it back in the forge. Because that spine that started out straight is now, it started out straight and then you're pulling down on it, and so it starts to buckle a little bit anyway. Not a ton, but at least a little bit. And so you start off and you break your corners like that, and then you just break that corner one more time and go over it a little bit, and it gets to be pretty smooth, fairly fast. You can spend as much time finish forging these as you want to. You can spend almost an infinite amount of time finish forging on them to get them to be absolutely perfect. I had one fuller like this that I cut in that I had like one bad mark on. I just spent a really long time like upsetting material back into it to get to where it looked good again, and it worked, but it took like an hour to get it where it was like super crispy again from having one bad mark. So yeah, if you want to be super rough with them and maybe spend a little bit more time grinding on them, that's totally fine. I think it's fun to get them forged out real nice. Yeah. Has a very convenient sway in it. That's about it. The straightening of them is pretty dang simple. You can straighten them off in the vise. Once you get your I-beaming done pretty aggressively, we'll take one more heat and get this fuller cleaned out. Once you get your I-beam pretty aggressively forged in, I like to use soft hammers or like a wooden mallet or a chunk of wood or something like that, so it's not wrecking the outside of it. But generally the issues that I've had are mostly with twisting, and so I'll just like lock one side in my vise fairly loosely, and then with a pair of tongs just twist it straight and then straighten it out with a hammer. You have any questions about how to get these things finished out or straightened out or anything like that? What's that?
When you normalize, do you normalize the entire thing?
Yeah, I mainly focus, so he asked if when I normalize, so the kind of prep to getting it heat treated after forging, that grain is super big. We want it to hold a good edge, so we want that grain to be fine. We normalize and do thermal cycles to get it there. I generally try and do the whole thing. I have a tiny forge, like tiny, and so I'll do like a thermal cycle or two, a normalization cycle or two on the handle, but I mainly do the blade. It doesn't need to have super fine grain. I'm not worried about, because you could like whack on it all day with a hammer and you're just gonna hurt your hammer. Yeah. All right, we're gonna do one more cutting cycle down this. I'm gonna squish it down to 100 thou. We'll get that fuller finished out too. Maybe. Yep. And then for actually finishing them, you want to finish with a lot of brushing. You want as little scale on there as possible. Brute to forge is cool, but you don't want that hard, loose scale on there. You want the actual iron to be showing through. I've used needle descalers on them before. You can buy them at Harbor Freight for like 35 bucks and you hook them up to your air compressor. If you do it while it's hot, you will rain down hot scale on yourself. It is maybe the most uncomfortable I've ever been while forging. It's not fun. It does work very good though, but you can do it cold. After it's cooled off, you take a needle descaler over the whole thing. If you're going to do something to this, you want to do it to pretty much the whole thing. You can also grind it and blend it with a needle scaler. And then you can either just like, after you quench them, wire wheel them. You can leave them as quenched. You can sandblast and blacken them with a cold blue solution. There's all sorts of different things you can do to them. You can brass brush it if you wanted like a blingy one. Yeah, there's all sorts of different finishes. I have done mostly wire wheeling and just oiling it. You can oil it not hot, but close to hot. All right, let's finish off this fuller. That ain't even close to straight. But there we go. So that last fullering will bump out that handle a good bit, but that's essentially what we're shooting for. See, it left a nice wide section on the outside. That last fullering cycle doesn't touch the I-beaming or the upsetting, whatever you call it, the mushrooming on the outside, but it will widen out the whole handle. So it looks funky not being done to the whole thing, but you get the general idea. Any final questions? No? Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. Sorry for holding you late.
All right, guys, that concludes our activities for the day. Thank you all for coming. Good night.